What evil lurks in the minds of men and women, the dark web knows. Just what is the dark web? Do you remember when you were a kid and you would walk out into the backyard and turn up all the stones just to see what kind of creepy crawly things were underneath? Well, the dark web is almost exactly like that. It's like a farmer's market, except that instead of fruits and vegetables, cybercriminals sell everything from identities to child pornography to drugs. There's so much information about the dark web that we're going to do 2 podcasts on cyber law now and dig deep into what is the largest layer of online criminality today. I'm attorney Stephen Tepler, and welcome to the Cyber Law Podcast. I chair the cybersecurity and privacy practice at the law firm of Mandelbaum Salzberg. Here at Cyber Law Now, we'll discuss today's cybersecurity issues, make you aware of them, how they affect you, and what you can do to protect yourself.
Malicious software.
The robots are coming.
They say we are not prepared.
Spying, snooping.
It's scary.
We are so fortunate to have as today's guest cybersecurity expert Jake Simpson, who is a dark web investigative expert with the Silent Group. And the Silent Group itself is a cybersecurity firm located in Sarasota, Florida. Jake, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks, Stephen. I really appreciate the invite for having me on. My name is Jake Simpson, and I am a cybersecurity engineer here at the Silent Group. Primarily specialize in incident response and dark web investigative intelligence operations, if you will. Prior to coming to Silent, I worked with a Department of Defense contractor doing everything from aerospace engineering services to cybersecurity work with them. More recently, a lot of my investigations have taken me into the realm of ransomware, cyber extortion, and interestingly enough, some critical infrastructure work as well. That's me in a nutshell. Thanks for having me again, Stephen. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure having you here, Jake. So here's the problem. We've all heard and read about the quote-unquote dark web. What exactly is it?
You know, honestly, I feel like when you say the words dark web, a lot of people really have no idea what it means. And technically, the dark web itself is not just one thing. It is a collection of many different dark webs or deep nets or dark nets or whatever you want to call it, primarily constituted as, small peer-to-peer or friend-to-friend networks. All the way up to, some of the larger popular networks like Tor, Freenet, and I2P, some of which are operated by public organizations and other individuals within the public sphere. Usually, users of the dark web will refer to kind of like the regular internet that you and I browse, on the daily basis as the clear net. And that's due to its unencrypted nature. So generally, you'll hear me talking through this podcast about, okay, so this is on ClearNet, this is on the darknet. That's why, mainly because of the encrypted nature of how it all comes together.
So is it really dark? I mean, why do they call it the dark web? What's the underlying message that somebody hears when they say, oh, this is a dark web site or a dark web offering on for sale on some auction site?
There's a few ways to answer that question. Dark in the sense of the dark web is essentially a fully encrypted, completely anonymous, and I'd add the little asterisks for caveats there, which we'll get to later. But generally, it's an unlisted, completely encrypted, separate entity that makes it's really built for an anonymization, right? And people use it to remain anonymous, which is why it's so popular for what it is today. And that's really what constitutes as being dark. It also operates a lot differently than the way the typical normal ClearNet internet would work. The darknet specifically is decentralized, whereas the ClearNet operates on a kind of a client-server paradigm. This decentralization, which kind of is more of the peer-to-peer type paradigm, is really critical and necessary for how the dark web works, and ultimately is behind its success.
Wow. So help me understand then. The ClearNet is what you and I use every day to access MSN.com or some news site or Amazon.com, for crying out loud. Isn't that correct?
Yep, that's totally correct.
And so how would you get in to the dark web? I mean, you've been there. You've traveled through it in your investigative capability. What do you do to get into the dark web? What is there? Is there a magic door, a password, or some other mechanism that you use to gain entry?
Well, so generally you're going to need a tool. And this tool to get you into the dark web is generally some sort of proxy or actual browser program. Tor, probably the most popular one and probably the best example to kind of talk about today, comes in a browser bundled package. And so essentially it's a Firefox browser with connection settings already kind of pre-built and baked into it to allow you to connect to this separate, unlisted network.
So when you speak about an unlisted network, and you're bringing up all of these concepts that we normally, even in the technology world, don't encounter every day. So how does it differ in terms of once you gain entry, there I am, I've just said open sesame or done something or used this Tor tool to gain entry to the dark web. And I guess the Tor is simply a derivative of a web browser that a lot of us already use, the Firefox browser. Is that correct?
Yep, that's totally correct. And to kind of build upon that a little bit more, I actually saw one recently that was a Chrome browser plugin that got you onto a totally different, darknet, if you will, totally different network that was used for nefarious purposes.
Wow, these are like different universes, aren't they?
Definitely. They all have a mind of their own and an ecosystem of their own.
So let's look at the Tor browser. If you're investigating criminal activity or nefarious activity, what do you do next once you get in and you basically access the dark web through a Tor browser?
That's a really good question, and it sounds a lot less sexy when you break it down than what people think it is really. But at this point, say we've gotten into the dark web, we're there, we've landed into the onion land of Tor, as they call it. First things first, really, you just go start looking. You start digging for things. Now, there's really no indexing. There's no Google. There's no search engines on the dark web. So you kind of have to know where you're going initially.
And so, where would you go? Well, let's move it back a little bit. I heard you talk about onions. And to me, onions are something I use when I saute for making some Italian tomato sauce. What is the concept of onions and how does it apply to navigating through the dark web?
Right. So onions is actually kind of in reference to this technique that Tor utilizes called onion routing. And it's actually part of a bigger premise, if you will, but it was really popularized by Tor because when you navigate to a dark web address, if you will, on Tor, it's going to end in .onion. So really, onion routing is the basic bare bones building blocks for the Tor network, and it really is this technique for anonymous communication over a computer network at its core. So in an onion network, all these messages are encapsulated in layers of encryption, kind of analogous to the layers of an onion, which is why everybody's like, hey, it's the onion network. So really, the encrypted data is transmitted through a series of network nodes called onion routers, and as it hits each of these different routers, it peels away a single layer of encrypted data, which then uncovers and reveals the data's next destination downstream. So when the final layer of that message is decrypted, the message has arrived at its destination. And through that way, the sender remains anonymous because, each intermediary step, each hop, if you will, only knows the location of the previous immediately preceding node that it came from.
Well, let's take a break. And when we return, we'll find out more about onion routers and the dark web and anonymized communications from silent cybersecurity expert Jake Simpson. Welcome back to the Cyber Law Now podcast. I'm attorney Stephen Tepler, and I am pleased to have Jake Simpson of the Silent Group talking to us about the dark web, onion routers, anonymization. And what we've learned is that the dark web is all around us. It's here. It's just a matter of using the right tools to get into the dark web. And let me make a disclaimer here. I am not recommending that anybody traverse the dark web without having a legitimate reason, such as law enforcement or other investigative rationales for trying to investigate it. But with that, Jake, let's talk more about this anonymization. Does this mean that you can actually get into the dark web and communicate with people and have real total anonymity?
You know, Stephen, that's a hotly debated topic. Does it really protect your identity? No. It is safe to say that it has been proven that Tor is not fully sufficient at protecting what a user's identity, and that is through either side channel attacks or some of the publications that have been made public through recent breaches of intelligence agencies that were working programs to try to de-anonymize Tor and whatnot. So really, simply put, at the end of the day, Tor is not really going to keep you safe. I mean, you have to have kind of a layered approach if you want to be safe on the dark web, and not essentially have your identity taken or anything like that.
Is that dangerous just to be present on the dark web? Is this something where you have to take certain precautions if you even enter or try to access one of these sites?
No. So just merely the presence of being on the dark web really is not in itself inherently dangerous. But when you start going to these different sites, you have no idea what you're going into. That site could potentially have malware on it that gets dropped on your machine, or it could have some sort of credential stealer that would say going to ask you to enter your password for someplace, and it will steal your credentials. So if you're just kind of sitting there doing anything, no, you're fine. But if you start actively engaging and going out to these different places, then yeah, you're definitely going to want to watch yourself and be wary of where you're going.
At the intro, I talked about what kind of things you can find on the dark web. And I mentioned that it was like a farmer's market, and that except instead of fruits and vegetables, what's for sale is just about everything that's illegal. From stolen identities to child pornography to even drugs, and maybe state secrets or proprietary information of competing companies. Why don't you talk a little bit about that if you can?
Well, so that's where it really starts to get interesting. We'll use the Tor network, for example, because it's probably the most well-developed and largest of the dark webs, if you will. For instance, on the Tor network, there's probably good 5 to 10 different well-known marketplaces where one can go and essentially spin up an account and buy things such as stolen credentials, stolen driver's licenses and passports, drugs, all sorts of different things, all in one place. It's essentially kind of like an Amazon, if you will, for the dark web.
And how do you pay for these? How do you pay for these for this illegal or contraband information that you can find? And I assume that this means payment card information, your credit card number and password and credit limit and all sorts of other personally identifiable, or even now, perhaps even personal health information, that protected health information.
Yeah, no, definitely. So how to pay for it? I'll kind of break that question up into a few pieces here, and we'll answer it in segments. So how to pay for everything? Now that's typically done through cryptocurrency. It was Bitcoin. Bitcoin was the cryptocurrency of choice that reigned supreme on the dark web markets for a long time. But then Bitcoin's price went through the roof, and it was no longer a viable option for people to conduct day-to-day business activities on these marketplaces with. So now what people have done is they switched to Monero. And Monero now is the legal tender, if you will, to purchase these nefarious or stolen goods or wares or software or credit card numbers on the dark web. So in terms of payment card information, that is highly, highly marketed, and there's a huge market for it. People are constantly wanting to find what they call fresh dumps of credit card numbers. And then from there, they'll purchase these dumps from vendors and then go and conduct their fraudulent activities with all these stolen credit card numbers. The personal health information, it's there. It definitely is there, and people are trying to sell it. The problem is it's not easily monetized in a criminal sense. Therefore, the demand for it is not as high as, say, credit card information or personally identifiable information, social security number, date of birth, banking information, addresses, things that somebody could do identity theft with.
So it sounds like there isn't much in the way of targeted marketing that goes on the dark web, is there?
Not necessarily, no. It really depends, to be honest with you.
So I've read somewhere that you can actually access Facebook through the dark web. Why would someone want to do that?
Well, so now we're starting to get into, the reasons why, Tor is as popular as it is. And, some of the more closer to home questions. A lot of people are using Tor and some other dark web browsers, really Tor specifically because Facebook and a bunch of other ClearNet sites host servers that are available through this hidden service purely for privacy. And that gets into the privacy debate of, okay, well, I don't want my ISP or I don't want, my employer or whoever snooping on my traffic whilst I'm conducting, social media or anything like that. And that's where it becomes a double-edged sword, if you will, right? So you have that now these people who are privacy conscious and are wanting to remain anonymous and be completely encrypted and safe on their end from their traffic, operating on the same platform as all these criminals, where it is a very, very unsafe network, or excuse me, not network, but very unsafe, site that they could go to or anything else. It's really quite strange when you wrap your head around just how close people are really operating with two totally different motives.
So when we come back, we're going to discuss this more. We're going to discuss more about anonymous messaging and the use of Facebook when on the dark web. And we'll be back with Jake Simpson from the Silent Group just in a little bit. Welcome back to the Cyber Law Now podcast. Again, I'm attorney Steve Tepler, and I have with me today in part one of Journeys Through the Dark Web, Jake Simpson of the Silent Group. And we're talking about not only the dark web, but communications, anonymization, and why on earth anybody would want to use Facebook for social media usage. Jake, you've told me that you can kind of mask your identity from your ISP, your service provider, but you can't mask your identity from Facebook, can you? I mean, when you access Facebook, Facebook has to know that it's you and that it's your social media account, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's definitely correct. Facebook does know your identity when you log on because you are authenticating and logging on to your account. The reason why people would want to use Tor to access their Facebook account or any other, ClearNet site that operates a hidden service on Tor as well, is purely for the privacy and anonymization factor. They really want to hide their traffic or they're trying to, they're being censored by their government or whatever, and that's why they'll turn to something like Tor for the encryption and the anonymization factor.
We've learned today that the dark web is really a dark and dangerous place where a lot of illegitimate activity goes on. And I want to thank Jake Simpson of the Silent Group in Sarasota, Florida, for taking his time out today to provide us with part 1 of Journeys Through the Dark Web. Don't forget to hit subscribe and get all your Cyber Law Now podcasts while you sleep. Share them with your friends. And if you have a cyber law subject you want to hear more about, contact us. Join me and Jake for part 2 of our Journeys Through the Dark Web on the Cyber Law Now podcast.